Brian's dangerously given me an hour to speak, but also asked me to share my story, and that's an absolute privilege to be asked to do that, and not something I've taken lightly. And it's a little bit daunting, I've got to say. I've shared various parts of my story over the years, but this would be the first time that I've told my whole life story, and I've obviously, not obviously, but I have had some pretty serious challenges physically and mentally with my health over the time, and I've been quite public about that. I suppose I'll share that for the benefit of others. But today's talk, one of the things I want to be sure of is that I don't just focus on the real challenges I've had in my life, because I've also had a very fortunate and very privileged life, and I feel extremely grateful for some of the experiences I've had in my life and the opportunities I've been given. So I'm also going to make sure I highlight those and make sure that, I'd like to ensure that everyone leaves here recognising that there's a lot of good things in our life, that we go through life, we achieve things, we do things, we get lots of things done, and we remember and we seem to sort of focus, I suppose, on often the challenges that we have and not so much on the highlights of our life. And so one of the things through, putting this together was actually recognising that there's been a series of great things that have happened in my life amongst all the challenges, and I'm extremely grateful for those things. I'm also very grateful for the invitation to be invited to share my story here, and as I said, my intention is to really to convey not just the challenges I've had, but also the great experiences I've had. It is my story. I think it's a pretty ordinary story, a pretty ordinary life. I think it's fairly normal. Some people think it's been quite amazing. I guess on reflection, I feel I have had an amazing life. I'm only halfway there, so who knows what's in store for the next half of the dash. But so far, so good. And actually, on my 40th birthday, I'm not as old as I look. I'm only 42. I wrote 10 things about my life, or life lessons I've learned in my life, and so I've got those included today. And then a few thoughts at the end. In our grazing story, we talked about the RCS grazing principles and the RCS soil health principles that I've talked about all over and over again. So I came up with these principles for a healthy life at the end of this story. So one of the biggest things I reckon I've learnt in my life is that between something happening and how we respond, there's a moment in between, and I reckon Jill Rigney and the late Dave Hanlon were the two people who first started to really impress this upon me, is that there's a moment in there, and sometimes it's a split second, sometimes it's a day or a week or a month, but how we respond is entirely up to us. And one of the things that I have tried to become very conscious of is pausing and taking a breath and thinking about where to from here and how to respond. I probably had a pretty good example of that just last week, dealing with a real estate agent who delved into becoming very much a real estate agent in an unsavoury manner, and it took everything out of my pausing and breathing and thinking about how I would respond before I responded to him. But it was it was a really good reminder for me just to stop and pause and breathe and think about how's the best way to respond to this. So that's the first lesson for the morning, I suppose, is things happen in our lives, and how we choose to respond is entirely up to us. And there's certainly been times in my life where I haven't taken that moment to just think about things, and that's caused some challenges. So I'm going to rattle through, from the early days, right back to when I was probably 2. Animal welfare and low stress stock handling weren't my strong point back then. But I harnessed that energy and put it to good use. Dug out a Hills hoist at some stage, swinging off a crowbar. So just to prove I have had some blisters on my hands at one point. And then spent a lot of time with my grandfather. I'm about to talk about some mentors, but my mum there in the bottom corner, one of my earliest mentors and still one of my greatest role models. She's been an amazing influence on my life, and just an amazing lady who I'm forever grateful for, and certainly was one of my earliest mentors, as is my grandfather, who you'll see a couple more photos from here in a minute. But that big chestnut horse, he was my grandfather's horse called Big Red, and I think he had a vet out one day with a horse dentist was trying to pull a tooth out and put this horse to sleep, and this Scottish vet was there, and she said, grandfather said, you reckon he's still breathing? And she said, well, I'm not sure. I think he's a wee bit dead, Mr. Hall. And Mr. Hall said, well, he's either a wee bit dead or a lot bit dead. Anyway, so unfortunately, that poor old horse died. But I remember, as a kid, from probably the age of 10, I just bursting around the hills in the Upper Murray on horses most of my childhood with my grandfather, alongside my grandfather, and he was the greatest influence on that early phase and probably that most critical phase of my life as a teenager. He was the most outstanding gentleman, lived till he was 93, and anyone who ever met my grandfather just recognised how much of a gentleman he was. He taught me some pretty important values, but particularly around honesty, taught me how to work and taught me about respect, and I'll be forever grateful for that. Particularly that work ethic. There have been, I guess one of the things that I'm proud of is the fact that I work my ass off for all the things I've had and achieved in my life. It's all been of my own doing, and I've worked very hard for it, and it's came from him. He was the one that impressed on me that, we've got to work for stuff. If we really want it, it takes a bit. So a very early role model and mentor for me. I left school when I finished school. I got into uni, decided I was going up north, was a ringer from the top end for a while. Again, my mum up there and classic ringer from the top end photo there. I've learned to do my buttons up a bit more these days. But it was a great period of my life, and I still reckon a great thing for any young person to go and experience is that just vast, wide open spaces up there and the big thing it taught me was initiative. That, when you leave in the morning to go and do a job, you can't just slip back to the shed to grab something. You're gone, you're out there, you've got to think ahead, think about what's going on, think about what you might need, not the least of which is a water bottle. But, whatever job you might be doing that day, you've got to take everything you need to get a job done. And also every day was a challenge. Like, we'd put 1,500 cows in the yard and they've got to be in and out of the yard the next day and drafted each which way. And it was just a hell of an experience. And I was 2001 when I went up there, pretty young stock camp still, but older head stockman. And in 2003, took on my first head stockman's job, and I was one of the youngest head stockman at the time, I suppose. Like I was 20, I think, or 21. I knew everything by then, of course. 3 years later, I realised I didn't know a thing. But anyway, at the time, it was a great challenge, and again, just a great opportunity to push myself and challenge myself. And I think back now and think about some of the experiences that we had, like, flying doctor type experiences with people, and in the middle of nowhere. And it was, at a very young age, experiencing and being exposed to some things. I remember, like, my first week as a head stockman at Killarney and loading cows at night under lights, and this fellow waved his hat at a cow and he dropped his hat and he bent down to pick his hat up, and as quicker than I could say, don't do that, he pushed the gate around like that and this cow kicked it and it hit him right in the forehead, knocked him out, fractured skull, laying there on the ground, flying doctor, the whole deal. Didn't die, but very close. And just, I think back to different experiences like that, and I think how much that grows you up as a person to be exposed to those sort of experiences and deal with those sort of events. At the time, didn't think anything of it, but in hindsight, recognised that they were pretty significant experiences. And including the photo on the right, there was actually that day my mum turned up and my sister. They were on their way to Killarney, and I was still at Newcastle Waters, and we were there helping them get across the creek that used to flood every year. And there was, during the wet season, there was about half a dozen of us there, and a great mate of mine, Charlie Corns, he was from Augathella. He was the overseer there, assistant manager, and he'd gone to find his horse, and we hadn't seen him that afternoon. And I went and got my sister and mum, and I got them across the creek, and I dropped them off to the men's quarters, which was literally a tin shed, like we used to call it the chook shed because it was a tin shed with 4 rooms in it. And I said, just make yourselves comfortable. We're just going to look for Charlie. We found him like 24 hours later. He had drowned. He kicked in the head by a horse. Again, like a tough, extremely tough thing to have to deal with. There was about half a dozen of us on the station. The greatest blessing was the fact that my mum was there. She knew Ken Warriner, who was the CEO of CBC at the time, and Ken actually rang the station and Mum answered the phone. She said, it's Kate Austin speaking, and he said, oh my God, thank God you're there. Why are you there? But thank God you're there. And again, there was half a dozen of us, and we were all under 25, dealing with this thing. We had the SES, the whatever else, everyone there. And thank God Mum was there. So a really tough time, and my first experience of losing someone that I was very close to, and Charlie was an amazing young man. So it was this was then, I went to Killarney in 2003, and Lux is in the top left-hand corner there, and John Quintana. John owned Killarney and Lux was there as a manager. My sister, who's in the middle down here, that's not two different girlfriends, that's actually my sister in the middle. And she was working over there, and we spent the next 2 years working together, and we're now great mates, and we have been ever since. Lux became one of my greatest mentors. John was American, and he'd lived out here for a long time, and so we did everything. We branded about 10,000 cars with the rope, and so that was kind of a small day there. There was two of us there with calves on the ground. It was a great experience, and I was in the US only a few weeks ago and had branding in South Texas, and it took about 2 minutes for the Aussies to get onto Facebook and be like, oh my God, that's such an old school, why would you do it that way? But it was so much fun and such a great experience, and a whole skill set that a whole stock camp of young people learnt over that period that probably wouldn't have otherwise learned up there. The other two pictures is Trish. We met there in 2003. We had a relationship for a period of time, and then we did not for about 9 years, and I say it took 9 years for her to come to her senses. She tells me it took 9 years for me to grow up. But in any case, so that was where Trish and I met, and it was just a wonderful time. There's also a time I in 2003 ran the stock camp. I started as running the weaner camp, and then the head stockman left. Lux was kind of, doing what he does in terms of turning a place upside down and really getting the wheels turning, and so there was a pretty high attrition rate of staff. And so I became the head stockman of the main camp there, and I had worked for really tough, hard people who the only time you knew you were doing the right thing was when you weren't getting yelled at, and had to figure stuff out for yourself, and it was like a baptism of fire, but a really great way to learn fast. But when I went to kind of manage people in that way, I realised that it wasn't much fun for them, and it was actually Trish breaking up with me at the end of the year. And after I got home, and I'd been home for a couple of weeks, and I was actually back around my old man, and my old man and I haven't got a very good relationship, and I realised I was becoming more like him than I was like my mother and my grandfather. And I made a very conscious decision to change my life at that point. And I read a book called You, Inc. that John McGrath wrote, who founded McGrath Real Estate. And it was just the right book for me at the right time in my life. It was some really amazing just life principles and stuff in there. And I kind of took these principles from what he did in a real estate agency in Sydney and applied them in a stock camp in the Northern Territory, including like writing quotes on the fridge of the stock camp. And in my diary, my bookmark in my diary was like my goals, I think. He used to put them in his shower, and he had a shower twice a day, so he'd read his goals twice a day, and he's like, write your goals, but don't put them in the bottom drawer and forget about them. So I used to have them as the bookmark in my diary, and every day that I wrote my diary, I'd read my goals again. Pretty powerful thing, and I came up with this phrase, this term, kind of a motto for my life of positive perfection, where I wanted every day to be a really positive day. I wanted my stock camp to feel inspired and uplifted, and when they did the wrong thing, let them know and help them learn from that experience, but also remind them all the times they did the right thing. And I would tell people 10 times over how great a job they'd done all day long. And it was amazing how many times, they'd come back to me and say, I got in trouble for this or that, or I did this or that wrong. And I said, no, you didn't. I also told you about 10 times how many times you'd done the right thing, but all you remembered was the one time you didn't get in trouble, but you got reminded about doing something differently that you could have done better. Anyway, and I wanted us to be, I set this kind of standard for my life of perfection, which was probably mad at the time, but the idea was that I wanted us to be the best we could. I knew we'd never be perfect, but if we aimed for perfection, we could be the best we could. So That became the motto for my life. That is my sister and Lux, and they did eventually get married, and we've just been over to Western Australia. Lux's 60th, and still very close, and it was a really wonderful time of my life. 2004, I used to say, was the best year of my life for a long time. I left the north. I was going to go fly helicopters like most roosters that go up there for a few years, and did a year on a road crew. We started in Tully and we finished in Tasmania, mostly driving trucks but paving roads. I did a year in a feedlot in southern Queensland, which was a great learning experience and an interesting time of my life. And then decided I was going to Canada. I just wanted to go and have a year off and have some fun, be a kid. All my mates had been to uni. I'd kind of had all these positions of responsibility for 4 or 5 years, and I just wanted to have a break and kind of chill out for a while. So I went over there, wasn't going to ride a horse, I was going to work in a golf club or something, and 3 days later I was on a ranch. But I was trail riding, and I never thought I'd enjoy trail riding, but we were, the shortest trip we did was an overnight trip, so we would ride 17 miles over 2 sort of 6,000 foot passes over into this river, camp in these beautiful cabins right on the edge of the Rockies, so we'd kind of look east towards Calgary and west back into the Rockies. Absolutely spectacular part of the world. And I met people from all over the world. Like, we'd have groups of 8 or 10 people at a time, me and a cook, and every day, like we'd go and do a trip, we'd turn around and go out the next day. And just used to, we'd sit around the fire at night, and I met people from all over the world and some amazing people, and it was just great fun. That winter I went and spent in the oil field. Coldest day I saw up there was minus 57. Not much works at that temperature. Did a bit up at Lake Louise. So this was, that was an old horse-drawn grader, I think it was built in 1927, and we used to grade this track around the side of Lake Louise that would freeze, and then we'd pull out on the lake, on the frozen lake, on these sleighs, and then turn around and look at that. That's a frozen waterfall. So as these springs fall out of the, as they trickle out of the mountain, it freezes, and so you get these extraordinary frozen waterfalls. So again, like, just a cool experience. A month of my life over Christmas. It was absolutely crazy. We had 6 of these horse-drawn sleighs that sat like 12 or 15 people, and away we'd go for an hour. We'd go down the end of the lake, turn around and come back again, and over all day. It was good fun. And then again, I went and worked on a grain farm in eastern Alberta. Never done any grain farming. Went for a job interview, and this guy said, "I just want someone who's under 50 and can lift heavy things." I said, "I'm your man." I could drive a truck, I could drive an end loader, that was about it. But I learned how to drive a header, drive a spray rig, operate an air seeder, all those things. And again, like, kind of got this exposure to grain farming that I've never had in my life. So just rounded a few skills out. And I used to go and, it was when I also started a business called Positive Perfection, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I used to go and hang out at this ranch on the other side of town, and we would brand 500 calves in the morning, like that. And there'd be the whole community would be there. They'd put on this massive lunch. There'd be kids running around everywhere, all jumping in to help. And the average age of those guys and the horses was about 55. And then there was me. And because I'd had that experience in the territory, and they were like, "Geez, where'd you learn to do that?" And so then I'd get to drag calves all day. Totally stitched me up the second time I went there. They said, I said, "I'll just get on the ground and wrestle a few calves." And they're like, "No, we've got a horse for you." And it's like, righto. So I went over and kind of was a bit suspicious and sized this horse up, got on and loped him round, and everything was right. Pulled my rope off, and then things started to go a bit sideways. Caught this calf, horse turned inside out. These old fellas are just shouting, "Whiskey, whiskey, whiskey." And there wasn't much left, and I got off this horse, and it was a bit of a wreck and a bit of a mess. But they're like, "Yeah, we just bought that horse at an auction on Thursday. We didn't know if he'd ever been roped off before." Thanks, you guys. Anyway, we got him broke by the end of the day, and it was good fun. But again, it was just a great experience. Like, I'd go over there every 2 weeks on a Saturday morning. We'd brand all these calves. As like I say, kids and young people and everyone running around, old fellas there on their horses, and it's a really great community thing where everyone gets involved in ranching for a day. So good fun and something I enjoyed. And so when I went out to that grain farm, it was also the start of Facebook. And so all these photos actually, I just went right back to the start of the Facebook reel from 2007 when it started. And I'd started to get all these messages from mates in Australia. How do I get a job? How do I go to Canada? What do I need to do? Like, how do I get a visa? And so I started this little business. It was the first business I had where I could help people, which was helping young people from farms in Australia get jobs on farms in Canada and ranches over there. And I found a business partner over there. He was thinking about doing the same thing at the time. his family owned a big ranch, and he had worked in Australia for a couple of years, so he found the jobs over there, but he knew what Aussies were like and what farming in Australia looked like. And I'd obviously grown up in Australia and had a fair range of experience across Australia at that point, so I knew what a kid from central Queensland, what their experience would be like versus someone from a dairy farm in Victoria, and so we could match people up with jobs over there. And I used to say we'd make people's dreams come true, and there was so many people that would never have gone to Canada had we not helped them through that process of getting a passport, getting a visa, getting a plane ticket, getting on a plane, getting to a job. And there's still a couple of people who are still over there now, 10 or 15 years later. So it was a really great thing. I got involved in a bunch of young farming organisations, started going to all these farming conferences. By the time I left Canada, I was a chair of the 2 young farming organisations in Alberta, which is a bit controversial, but again, just a great experience. And I threw myself into that whole young farming space and networking and getting to know other young people. I came back to Australia in 2010, I think it was, because that business had sort of got to a point where I'd be on a header until midnight and then interviewing people on Skype until 3 o'clock in the morning, then going back to work at 8 o'clock the next morning, and wasn't terribly sustainable. So I came back to Australia and kept working on that, and we expanded it into this business called Outback HR, which was harnessing kind of that backpacker cohort of young people in agriculture that we'd been using in Australia for a long time, and just set up like this week or 2 week crash course of here's how to ride a horse, ride a motorbike, fix a fence, like all this basic stuff. Knew we couldn't teach them that in a week, but we could kind of get a sense for their common sense and initiative, which are the 2 things, and work ethic, the 3 things that they would need if they were going to get a job in agriculture. All the research said that they would pay for this. The reality was they wouldn't. They all wanted a job, but they didn't want the training. They just wanted to get a job. So learned a hard lesson in business and recognised that there was some stuff I didn't understand about business, particularly around financials, that I needed more skills and knowledge in. And it was my first sort of encounter with some mental health challenges. Obviously had a bit of an impact psychologically. It was hard to understand what was going on, and spoke to a great mate of mine, Woodsy, who said, Stu, go to a GP. I'd heard his story, go to a GP. That was where I started, and used some antidepressants at the time, and just helped level things out for me. And I actually had a coach at the time, like this life coach, when they first started doing things. And she said, what's the worst that can happen? Like, you go broke, you get a job and you pass the debt and you move on. And that was basically what I did. Went contract harvesting for the summer, and my mother had been sending me the application forms because I got into university, deferred for a year, tried to defer for a second year, and they said, no, you can't. And I said, well, I'm going back up north. And so then every year my mum would send me the application forms for Marcus Oldham in about September every year, and I'd say, oh, thanks, Mum, that's great. I'm right. And after this year, she did the same thing. She's like, Stu, maybe it's time to go and get an education. I was like, yep, I think you're right. And so I was 28 when I went down to Marcus. Best thing I did, because it was, I'd had some life experience, and so learning stuff, I knew exactly what I needed to learn. And so in the first 6 months at college, I learned all the stuff around P&Ls, cash flows, balance sheets, annual reports, analysing businesses. It was absolutely perfect timing. Like, everything I needed to know was the stuff that I was learning. And so it was the best investment on myself, and I urge any kid to go and get an education, particularly in business. I think it's the skills we're lacking the most in agriculture, is those fundamentals of business. And that was what I learnt at Marcus. And the fact that I went when I was a bit older meant that I learned, like, I really absorbed everything I learnt, where there was plenty of 19-year-old kids who had done their mandatory year out of school, and Dad had sent them down there, and they had a great time, and so did I. I chose to just use that photo for my year at Marcus Oldham. There was plenty of others on Facebook, but that was probably the most appropriate. But a really valuable experience in my life. Also had spent a few months back up north. I worked for a consultant in Kununurra as a professional placement that we had to do. And Trish and I, we'd been friends, for the whole time, and reacquainted ourselves. And so at the end of that year, after I graduated, we did a trip all the way up the east coast. And we got to Port Douglas, and we drove past this helicopter and, on the side of the road, and she's like, don't even think about it. And I was like, there's an idea. And So I got this helicopter and they flew us out to this sand island on the middle, like on the reef, and we're at Port Douglas, and it used to go underwater on a high tide. So the joke was that if she said no, I was just going to leave her there. And she literally took a photo when we were flying out there and put it on Facebook, and she's like, "Oh my God, everyone's probably going to think you're going to propose." And I was like, yeah, they probably are, yep. And so I did, and thankfully, and she wouldn't say, I won't tell you the first thing that came out of her mouth because it's inappropriate, but wasn't the response I was hoping for. And it wasn't until we got back onto the island that she, because I did it like underwater while we were scuba diving or snorkeling. And it wasn't until we got back to the helicopter and I actually found the ring that my mother had given me as an heirloom to give to her that she realised I was serious. She just thought I was a broke college student. How on earth could I afford a ring? And so, I must be joking. That she actually said yes. Anyway, we got married in 2013. I'd got back up north. I got a job as a manager with Charles Darwin Uni. First manager's job. World was on fire. I just thought I was living the dream. We're engaged. It was a job that I'd have aspired to for my whole life. And about, April or May that year, we were lucky enough to buy our own cattle. I'd said to another great mentor of mine, when we visited him on that trip, if you're ever selling cattle, I'd love to buy some cattle from you, because he bred really fertile Brahman cattle, and we thought we could breed some bulls out of them, and that would be our start for our little cattle enterprise in the north. And so they were our little heifers we bought from them. And, I was kind of on a high, turned out to be the worst job of my life. Not in a box mind did not fit with a university approach where everything has to fit in a box. And so it was extremely challenging, where they had this attitude where they want to do all these great things and lots of innovation and leadership and progression and whatever else. But at the end of the day, the reality was it had to be very safe and it had to be very risk averse and had to fit in a box and don't do anything too out there. And so that was pretty hard. And again, kind of ran into these mental health challenges. And there was I used to manage the station at Mataranka, but also they had a stud at the rural college outside Katherine, and it had been a really traditional stud, and they had no students. It was, this college was set up in the 90s to kind of give jackaroos and station hands an apprenticeship or a traineeship in livestock. And but over the years, they'd kind of lost their relevance and lost the quality of their teaching staff and whatever else. And so, it was a great challenge to go in there and try and inject some reality and some progression and some innovation into that organisation to help attract, more students and whatever. And so one of the things we started, I was like, well, let's actually start breeding some fertile cows, not some pretty cows, that are actually productive and actually will, have some commercial relevance. And it turns out they weren't very on board with that idea. The lesson for me was around empowering them as to why this was so important and why this was a good thing to do. I just, young and gung-ho, charged in there and said, we're going to change the world and here's how we're going to do it, without empowering them with the why, I suppose. And I got called up to the college for a meeting one day, and this new director had turned up. And I had to report to like 7 different people or committees. Like, people would come out and for a tour, and they'd be like, so how many people do you report to? And there was a guy in Katherine, there was a guy in Darwin, there was another guy in Darwin, there was a committee, there was another committee, it was crazy. Anyway, trying to keep them all happy was a challenge. And so this new director turned up, and he was going to change the world, and so that didn't go so well that we were both going to change the world, and we were on different wavelengths. And he called me up there and for a meeting, and we sat down, and he said, you're not going to manage the stud anymore. And I was like, I beg your pardon? And he's like, yep, we don't like what you're doing with it, and so we're going to take it off you. And that was like my one little thing. Here's a way that we could do something better and show some real innovation. And that just absolutely tore the guts out of me. And it was beyond my control. I didn't realise that at the time, but looking back, that was what it was. He'd made a decision that was beyond my control. It was his decision to make, entirely up to him. There was great lessons in it for me, but I was just, like I say, ripped the guts out of me. And I drove back to town and was looking for the biggest tree, basically. And I managed to get to town and was so upset and so wild, and I threw my phone on the dash of the Twat and broke the windscreen, and I just drove myself down to the hospital, and I just said, I need someone to help. Like, I was in a really, really bad place. And that was my first experience, at that level, and very scary, and it hurt a lot. And it was, I went home and just stopped for a week or so, I think. Very grateful for Trish being around at that point. She was an incredible support, and still is, and has been all the way through this. But that was kind of my second chance, I suppose. And at the end of that year, they actually got a new vice chancellor in Darwin, who I also used to report to. And this guy came down, and strangely enough, he was the first guy that actually understood what I was trying to do. And a month later, called me to Darwin. He said, "Stu, we're going to wind this show up because we don't have an interest in owning a commercial cattle station that doesn't train students, and your energy and drive and passion is better used elsewhere." And kind of got the golden handshake, and moved on. It was kind of a blessing in disguise. It was the best way it could have ended. And I was grateful for him, but it was a very tough experience. And so I think that happened, and Trish was pregnant. So I had a pregnant wife and no job, and that was a bit stressful, and some pretty serious mental health challenges at the time. Anyway, because Trish was going on maternity leave, we had Harry in February 2015, and so we just went contracting, and it was actually great fun. We spent the next 2 years just living out of a caravan wherever we sort of pleased, wherever the work was in the territory. I was educating weaners for a start there. That was Harry was 8 weeks old when Trish strapped him on the front of the quad bike, like in the baby harness thing, and away we went tailing weaners, and then we're drafting our own cattle up here. Contract fencing. I was driving a truck for a while. I ran a spray contracting crew in these sandalwood plantations for a while. Just kind of did whatever came along, and it was pretty good money. We had our own cattle at the time, and just put a bit of energy and drive into whatever got put in front of us. And a very proud moment there, introducing Harry to my grandfather, and we did that for about 2 years. But the challenge in it was that it was not, there was no long-term longevity in it. It was very unsettling. Because I kind of had that, when Harry was born, I had this innate sense of needing to provide for my family, and now I had a family, and so I needed a home base and a stable job and, reliability of income and all those things, and didn't have that. And again, got in a bit of a pretty dark place, I would say, and took a little contract to go and caretake a friend's place for 3 weeks. Would strongly advise, do not do that when you're in a bad place mentally, to go and live on a cattle station on your own for 3 weeks. And Harry and Trish came out at one point because I was not feeling very well at all. And I, strangely enough, had my first interview for the job at Wilmot during that period. But it was also a period where I would drive around each day with a rifle on the dash, and wasn't sure whether that was. I was telling myself that was for wild dogs, and there was plenty of times when I thought of other uses for it, and it was not a very pleasant time. And so I had an interview for Wilmot at that time, and we'll get to Wilmot in a second. But along the way, we went and did GFP, and again another mentor came into my life. I was scrolling through Facebook photos, and this one came along, and anyone who's done GFP should be able to tell me what that photo is and what that process is. But and I'm sure there's much better photos out there of Terry McCosco, but that one was on Facebook as well, so I grabbed it. Again, one of the best investments we've ever made in ourselves was to go and do GFP. I'd been around people and organisations who had been through the RCS learning experience, and just seen such harmonious, successful, sort of stress-free businesses that had their shit sorted was probably the best way to describe it, and was drawn to that. And I'd started to build a network of people in that space. The start of them was Lux's family, the Lethbridge family from North Queensland, Russell and Old Lux, and so, but we wanted to do that course when we were in a position to be able to implement it. And a couple of reflection on the university, part of the PD at the university, they wouldn't let me go and do GFP because it wasn't a, bloody certified course. I wasn't going to get a cert 4 in grazing from it. I was going to get some other certificate. So Trish and I went and did it on off our own bat. And I reckon if you pay for something yourself, you'd probably value it more. And so we did. And so then we're kind of looking for an opportunity to implement what we'd learnt. And that was where we started looking for roles, like what we ended up with at Wilmot. So 2016, I started at Wilmot, really serious looking character there, became another mentor of mine and was pivotal in Tom Archer, who's here, in getting me through that first 12 or 18 months there, where we'd come from the sand and the speargrass at Catherine to literally the land of milk and honey at Ebor. And we got an opportunity to put into practice all this stuff that we'd been learning about. Just an amazing place to live, to raise our family, absolutely beautiful part of the world, an extraordinarily productive part of the world. I've never seen a place grow grass like Wilmot used to. Again, was so proud to be able to go mustery one day with my grandfather in the buggy. He was hanging on for dear life there. And it broke his heart to see so many black cattle, because he was a Hereford man. Again, something I'm forever grateful for, having had the opportunity to share that experience with him. This is the third sort of second chance I've had, where the third life out of my 9 that you supposedly get. By the end of 2017, we'd actually been to Western Australia to see my sister and brother-in-law, and I got this flu, and I've been to 3 different GPs, and I was literally waking up in the middle of the night with my whole chest was wet, like just these massive fevers. And like I said to Trish, that there's something wrong with me. I don't know what it is, but anyway, we eventually went to another GP in Armidale, and she sent me for a CT scan. Came out of that, and the lady said, "I'm going to send this through for priority," and we were walking into one of the things out of GFP, and we're starting to do next steps and executive link and that sort of thing, was, have you got a will? So we're literally walking into lunch with my brother-in-law, Trish's twin brother, to sign our wills, because he's a lawyer in wills and estates. And the doctor rang and said, you need to come back around here right now. And I said, can I have lunch? And they're like, no, you need to come now. And I was like, oh, Jesus. So I go back around there, and he said, here's your CT scan. Your right kidney is twice the size of your left one. And so you need to see a specialist, like Brisbane, Sydney, which one do you want to go to? Like tomorrow, this is really serious. Like they'll probably take your, they might want to take your kidney out, etc. I'm like, holy shit, righto. Go back to lunch, sign my will, back to Wilmot. We were going to drive to Brisbane on the Monday. This is a Friday afternoon. Ended up in an ambulance to Dorrigo, down to Coffs Harbour, plane to Brisbane. Got there at midnight on a Saturday night, and I spent the next 7 weeks there. And that photo was taken that week, and that photo scares the shit out of me to think about how close I was. And they told me a few weeks later, after I'd had a 9-hour operation, that I probably had 24 hours to live. And Tom actually turned up a couple of days after that photo was taken, I reckon. And it was funny, we were laughing about it a few months later, because I think you had Jimmy, Will or Jimmy, one of the boys with you, and I was telling Tom, like, can you sort this truck out, and can you book those cattle in the feedlot, and can you tell those fellas at home to get this other job done, and can you do that? Next thing, about 6 nurses came running in, and they said, you've got to go, you've got a collapsed lung, we need to get you straight back downstairs, we've got to drain your lung, blah, blah, blah. And so they're wheeling me out, and Tom's got his notebook out, and he's writing down a couple of other notes of things to do, and I'm just, anyway, I ended up with a collapsed lung. I had a staph infection on my kidney, ended up with a collapsed lung. It took them, they couldn't reinflate it because the infection, it sat on the side of my lung. I had to have an operation, and this Russian doctor came in about a week before Christmas, and he said, we'll do keyhole, but if it doesn't work, we'll have to do the big cut. And he sat there waving his hands like this for about 15 minutes while he was describing this operation. And I didn't hear anything he said other than this big cut. And so they opened me up all the way around, literally. They said it's like an orange peel on the outside of your lung, and they'd peeled it off. He said, I spent the last 2 hours just suturing up holes in the side of your lung. Rang Trish, and Mum was sitting in the waiting room. They rang at the end of the operation, and the first thing he said was, absolutely terrible operation. And Mum and Trish were like, oh my God. Anyway, his bedside manner wasn't so great, but he effectively saved my life. And so It was a pretty tough time on our family. Harry was 18 months old. He turned 2. I was out of hospital at the time. He turned 2, but we had Christmas in hospital. And came out of there with a bit of a come to Jesus moment in terms of what are we doing, where are we going, what's the long-term view for Wilmot. Sat down with Al and Al also at that time, he was extraordinarily supportive. Al owned Wilmot through that whole period that we were in hospital, was wonderful to our family. And I started asking questions around the vision and the long-term plan, and so we sat down and had a great conversation around that, and Al kind of empowered me and said, you go away and come up with it. So we did, and I first, for probably one of the first times in my life, felt truly valued for the drive and the passion and the work ethic and the energy that I had for what we did. And so that led to buying Morocco, which is the farm in the middle photo at the top there, in the middle of the drought. That was crazy in hindsight, but trying to plant something in the middle of a drought was not a good idea, but a great lesson. We also had a bushfire at the end of that year, and Poppy was born. And the day of the fire, I literally kissed Trish and the kids goodbye and sent them into town, and we had this fire came through Wilmot. Pretty wild experience. I'd dealt with bushfires a lot up north, but that was something that I hadn't experienced before, and that was like September 2019. And so then we just watched the whole of the East Coast burn over the next few months, which was pretty tough. We also, at the start of that year, had our first field day at Wilmot, not dissimilar to this day, that again was all, and very similar to Brian's message this morning, it was all about just sharing what we did, and particularly in the drought, was when there was a lot of charity around about the drought, and I wanted to do something that was more valuable than just, donating to buy a bale or something. And so what we tried to do was through education was saying, let's think about how we manage the drought differently, and our approach. And so we had Dave McLean and we had Kit Farrow come out, and we thought we'd have 100 people turn up. We had 250 people turned up, and we did that for the next 6 years, and that's still going. And it was a wonderful thing to do. And like Brian said, it was just our way of kind of helping beyond just what we did on that farm, which we're really passionate about. That next few years, like 2016 to 2024, was a very defining period of my life and career. Over that 8 years, grew that business. Annabelle was born in 2021. We also finished Executive Link, I reckon, around 2020. Again, another great investment in ourselves. That's a RCS, for those who aren't aware. It's an RCS course where you build a board of your peers, and over 3 years you meet 3 times a year, and you become directors of each other's businesses, and a really empowering forum for business growth and personal development. And we had extraordinary personal development through that experience. I was lucky enough to give a keynote presentation at the National Farmers Federation Conference, which for me was a bit of a personal highlight in my life, in terms of I've always wanted to have an influence and an impact in some capacity. And for me, that was an opportunity to share particularly the regenerative agriculture message on the national stage, and in front of an audience of bureaucrats and lobbyists and so forth. We also did the Microsoft deal. We sold carbon credits to Microsoft, which was again a pretty pivotal moment where it lit the world on fire, the soil carbon space on fire, in terms of it was a pretty significant amount of money. But more importantly to us was sharing the message and the story as to how we did it, and that it was our grazing management, our land management principles that led to us building soil carbon, and that was what we wanted people to understand, was that we could actually build soil carbon in our soils and keep them there for the long term. The more recent deals that Tom and others have done were 10 times bigger deals than what we did, but that was the start of it, and thankfully it started a whole conversation around soil carbon, which was again something quite satisfying and a thing I'm grateful for having been involved in. Things were going along pretty well until we got to 2023, and I was doing the Australian Rural Leadership Program. That was graduation in Canberra. Trish and I were going to the Rural Women's Dinner at Parliament House. But 2023 was a really tough year. For anyone who was in the livestock game remembers that we came off the incredible highs no one really knew where it was going to finish, but I used to take screenshots of the Eckie each time it fell another 100 cents, and that was in about, I think, October, when we were down to $3.99 and we'd started the year at 1,200 something. And we were peak testing cattle one day. There was 3 of us in the yards and a vet, and storms around, and we're just about finished. And I said, we'll just get this done. We'll just kick these cattle out and we'll get out of the way. And there's this little tiny storm came past, and as we were letting cattle out, like there was lightning strikes not far away, and we were literally counting cattle out, and it hit that post in the cattle yards. And 2 of us were standing beside each other, and it was like someone had belted us on the head with a frying pan, and a girl and a horse 20 metres away, and 2 cows laying on the ground beside us, and we just looked at each other, and I got home that night and absolutely scared the living daylights out of me, in terms of, I was so lucky, but the fact that we'd been pushing so hard to just get shit done that it nearly cost the lives of 3 of us. And the timber on the ground was like, that was where I took the photo from, and that's where the lightning hit. And again, like a real smack in the face to be, just say, like, slow down. And it was all around navigating that whole, we started the year with a $10 million livestock inventory, and we finished with a $3 million inventory, and having to report that to a family office and investors and finance people was extremely challenging. And started sort of a series of events then that led to 2024 being the end of our Wilmot period. By May, I think, April or May, start of May, I was in a very bad place again. I had a conversation with someone who was very important to me, who I thought was the one person who still had my back, and it turns out they didn't. And that was the 5th time that I tried to find a nice big tree to make everything go away. And thankfully I had my wife Trish there, and a few others. Alan Parker, again, was a key person for me through last year. And I took some medication for a long time, and done so well to get this far. Anyway, Big Alan couldn't have been more helpful all year, and I'll be forever grateful for the impact he had, and how helpful he was to me. That photo in the middle was actually dinner in Sydney. It was the first night Trish and I had ever had away from our kids for, I don't know, not ever, but for quite a few years. We had a lovely dinner in Sydney, and we felt like the wheels were back on the wagon, and things were heading in the right direction. And the next morning, our world turned upside down, and we were told that we were no longer required at Wilmot. And that was extraordinary, totally unexpected, and very hard to come to terms with. And again, it was something that I really cared about, and someone had made a decision that was beyond my control, but impacted me, and I just had to deal with that. And so, again, we tried to just take a big deep breath and pause and think about where to from here and how to handle that. And that took a little while. But here we are. And we wrapped up everything at Wilmot in September last year, and have found a new journey for ourselves. And so I had a trip to the US in October, and we basically, our intention now is to, it's on the next slide, but it was all about our own stuff. Let's try and set up an enterprise where we can run our own cattle on our own land. And in terms of financing that, supplementary income, let's put to work helping other people in a professional sense. And so Audacious Ag was born, and that's the vision of Audacious Ag, is to help the world and help people have a positive impact on the landscape and produce healthier food fundamentally. So we do 3 things. Our intention is to work with family offices and high net worth individuals to help them deploy capital into agricultural land and have it managed regeneratively, build natural capital, and grow healthier food. We also sort of have a bit of an offering with institutions and corporations in terms of educating them around natural capital, what it is, how we build it, why it's important, what it looks like in reality, and then for individual farming families and people, and coaching and mentoring. So there's kind of 3 different programs there, like a 6-month one-on-one coaching program, a 12-month group coaching program, and a little agri-professionals mentoring program. And so that's the vision in the bottom. At the bottom there is for our own cattle and own land, and so we are presently establishing a joint venture with a guy on 2 farms down on the bottom end of the Liverpool Plain, and we're working on a couple of other deals in contract breeding arrangements with other businesses that hopefully will help us be able to afford to buy some country of our own in the not too distant future. And our vision, we wrote this vision a few years ago and it still stands today, and this is our why and our purpose, and it's about healthy family, loving partners, helping each other, helping others, living joyfully, loving each other just as we are, with genuine connection with those that are important, supporting each other to be the best versions of ourselves, and we grow and eat our own food, or it's sourced from farmers that we know and trust. And this is our why. These 3 little rat bags, Harry's 10 and Poppy and Annabelle are nearly 6 and nearly 4. And we've been blessed with 3 very beautiful, healthy, lovely kids. And my goal in life is to not build something and give it to them, but build something to a position where I have an opportunity and can help them do what they would like to do in their lives. So that's our why. And so I'm getting the wrap up here, and I've got to get to the life lessons here pretty quick. But this has been my greatest challenge. It's been all my passion and enthusiasm and energy and drive for everything I do. And my first head stockman said to me one day, "Go and wash that toyota and treat it like you own it." And I didn't understand it at the time. But this whole concept of ownership is what I've thrown into every job I've ever had in my life, where I've fundamentally treat it like I own it. And the challenge it's created for me is the pressure that I put on myself to do the absolute best job I can. And while it's been the cause of a lot of my challenges where the pressure valve eventually bursts, it's also been the driver of all the successes that I've had in my life. And I've had to come to terms with the fact that control is an illusion. The only thing we can truly control is how we respond. And that is, as I said at the start, is something that I'm trying to come to terms with. So these are my life lessons. Do the best you can with what you've got. And I've never had much in the way of money or things, but I was blessed with a solid foundation from a young age. Honesty, respect, integrity, manners, and a strong work ethic. Everything I've achieved has been a result of that early foundation. Nothing counts as much as blood. I think it's off Lonesome Dove, but I'm grateful every day for my incredible wife, Trish, and my 3 amazing kids, as well as my parents and siblings and extended close family. And don't ever take for granted how lucky we are to have 3 beautiful, healthy children. Look after yourself physically and mentally. I've had some close shaves on both fronts, and we don't always get a second chance. And I reckon in the realm of mental health, we've got to get over ourselves. And particularly as blokes, if we just bloody well get over ourselves and start talking about how we're feeling and what we're thinking, I reckon pride and ego are the 2 most powerful things in the world. And if we could just get over ourselves and ask for help more often, I reckon we'd get a whole lot more out of this life. Be open-minded and challenge the status quo. Get curious. Trust your intuition. You never know the fun you can have when you look and think outside the square. Surround yourself with great people and mentors. Seek out people who lift you up, challenge you to do better and be better, and provide support and guidance along the way. I'll be forever grateful for the mentors I've had in my life who have done these things when I've needed it most. Bite off more than chew and then chew like hell. The chewing is the easy part. The fear of drowning will make you swim like hell. One of the greatest catalysts for change is pain, and it's often in our darkest hours that the magic happens. If you really want it, you've got to work bloody hard for it. Be willing to wear a bit of pain. The success and rewards taste amazing. Understand the fundamentals of business. Never stop learning. I've got a picture here in a second of all the professional development I've done in my life, and whether it's in your personal or work life, but definitely in agriculture, nothing will help you succeed more than understanding the fundamentals of business. Be kind and be a good human. I had a conversation at breakfast this morning. It was the first thing that came to mind was how important it is just to be a good human. There's not much more to it. Genuinely care about others and be of service to them when they need it, because what goes around comes around. And consider your legacy. Those who matter most to you will remember who you were. Everyone else will remember what you did. So this is the professional. I was unpacking boxes. We moved house the other day, and I literally had this whole removalist box full of folders and books. And I promise I think the Grazing for Profit one actually props up my computer screen. The Executive Link one, there's just about every bloody course under the sun you can think of to do, but it's the most valuable stuff I've done in my life. The most exciting bit is the folders right at the top there. They're the ones for flying, which I've just started to do, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. And this is a quote from a fellow from Canberra, Paul Giroa House. He's an Aboriginal elder down there, and he gives a lot of welcome to countries in Canberra. And I've heard him say this quite a few times, and I just love it. Look to see, listen to hear, and listen and learn to understand. Get up, stand up, and show up. And it's such a powerful message in any forum. And just quickly on mental health, it would be remiss of me not to talk about how I've managed through these challenges. These shirts, for those who aren't aware, the Trademark Boys, they started these shirts a few years ago, and they're about starting a conversation. That's what it says on the back. This is a conversation starter, and they're all about putting mental health in the public eye, basically, and they've had tremendous success. So what works for me, when I realise I'm having a pretty tough time, the first thing I do is go and see my GP. I, up until last year, had not needed to use medication for about 10 years. And I was, it was a bit of a sad day in my life when I had to start taking some medication again, but I'm since have been able to get off that again. Sleep and rest are incredibly important to me. Eating better food, exercising, it's actually true that we actually do need to get out and exercise. It is really good for your brain. And another person who's had a tremendous impact is Gary McDougall with some Dawson therapy. I had migraines for like 20 years. They would knock me out for a day every 3 or 4 weeks. And I went and saw Gary, and I will not do justice to what Gary does. I think I saw Margaret Bridgewood here earlier. Marg can tell us all about this as well, but he literally got rid of my migraines for nearly 2 years, and any time I start to get them again, I go and see him again, and it's all about balancing energy. Which he does so well, and has been an absolute game changer and life changer for me. Again, someone I'm incredibly grateful for. And so these are my final 5 life principles. These are my grazing principles for life. Start your day right. This is one thing I do now. I have a morning routine. I get out of bed early, get some fresh air, drink a big glass of water, read a book, exercise. What else do I do? Just start our day right, and that's had a huge impact on my life. It is true, exercise really helps. I have not practiced what I preach. When I'm in a bad place mentally, I don't get out of bed and go for a run, but I now realise that's what I need to do. And I actually do it without music, so we can hear the world around us, which I think is really important. Eat well, eat real, healthy food. Here is a tremendous example of that. Avoid processed shit as much as you can. Learn something new, read real books. That's another big thing for me, has been actually opening a real book, getting out and attend courses, go to the field day, attend things like this. They're so empowering. Put your bloody phone down. Again, I'm not the greatest proponent of this, but I recognise how important it is. Someone I follow on Instagram, I love their message. Their hashtag is GTFO, stands for Get Thee Outside. Which I think is such a great and important thing. Sleep is really important for me. We've got to remember to recharge our batteries, and particularly as blokes, tune into our own thoughts, feelings and emotions. Put your pride aside and find help when we need it. So we can't always control what happens, but we can control our response, and that's been probably the biggest lesson for me in my life, has been recognising what I need to do when in the face of adversity, but also when opportunities are presented to us. And we've had more challenges just literally this week. Last Wednesday, we were literally about to sign a big contract and exchange contracts on a farm to buy, and it all fell over. The contract we were due to sign, the other party pulled out, so we couldn't exchange on the farm we were going to buy. And so again, we're at another point in our life where we just got to take a breath and pause and reflect and think about where to from here. So that's my story in an hour. Thank you, Brian.